Dr. Elias Wren stared at the flickering holographic readout on his lab console, his fingers hovering just above the controls. His unkempt hair and worn-out lab coat made him look every bit the reclusive genius he was, buried deep in his solitary research on Europa's icy surface. For months he'd been chasing anomalies in quantum wave interference patterns, trying to crack the code of the universe. He wasn't interested in fame. He wasn't even interested in the rewards. He just needed to know if it was real. His heart skipped a beat as the numbers shifted in a way that didn't make sense. The data was still there, but something was wrong. A brief flicker of static, followed by a calm, eerie silence, overtook the screen. He squinted at the display. Leaning closer, fingers still frozen in midair. The data wasn't just corrupted. Something had triggered a disruption in space itself. Then it happened again. A pulse of energy, so brief it was almost imperceptible, rippled through the quantum field. The probe, a small, specialized deep space sensor he had launched on a hunch, vanished. But the readout wasn't just blank, it was empty, completely devoid of any information. Just silence. He felt a strange tightening in his chest, the air in the lab suddenly thick with anticipation. This wasn't a malfunction. It couldn't be. For the first time in his life, Elias was struck by the sensation that he was on the edge of something monumental, something beyond all the theories, beyond what was possible. He quickly engaged the backup algorithms and watched the display change. The probe had reappeared, but it hadn't come back from the place it had been. It had come back from somewhere else. The stars on the monitor didn't align with any known chart of the universe. They were arranged in a pattern, one he couldn't place. A complex grid that he recognized only from his own notes, scribbled down long ago as theoretical gaps in quantum physics. His breath caught in his throat. Was this a sign? No. It was more than that. The anomaly wasn't just a ripple in the fabric of reality. It was a gateway. Elias felt the sudden rush of exhilaration and dread flood his senses. No one else in the scientific community would believe him, at least not without proof. But this was proof. The data was irrefutable. He had seen it with his own eyes. He quickly ran the calculations again, isolating the variables that made the probe disappear, and there it was. A frequency pattern not random but deliberate. The kind of signature that suggested intelligence. Someone, or something, was sending a signal across the void. He wasn't alone. A door had just opened, and Elias Wren had been the one to walk through it. But what lay beyond? He didn't know, and that terrified him. With trembling hands, he set to work on the next step. He had to go further. He had to know. Elias sat in his chair, staring at the monitor as if willing it to speak, to explain the impossible pattern he had uncovered. His mind raced, each new theory colliding with the last. The data didn't lie. Whatever had happened with the probe was more than a freak anomaly. He could feel it deep in his bones, a breakthrough. But what did it mean? Where had it gone? And most importantly, what had followed it? The lab was cold, the hum of the life support systems the only sound breaking the silence. He needed more answers. He'd spent the last 20 years pursuing a theory most of his peers called absurd, that the laws of physics weren't uniform across the multiverse, that hidden cracks in reality could allow travel between dimensions. The kind of thing they laughed about in the halls of academia, if they even deigned to acknowledge him at all. But now Elias realized he had stumbled onto something far more extraordinary than he'd ever anticipated. AI, he said, his voice sharp and demanding. Prepare the prototype, I need a test subject. The artificial intelligence, a familiar voice he had designed years ago, chimed in. Dr. Wren, are you certain? The anomalies are— I know what they are, Elias interrupted. I'm not asking you to agree, I'm asking you to prepare the test. He slammed a fist on the console, his frustration boiling over. He couldn't wait anymore. The answer was just beyond his grasp, and he knew the only way to understand the full scope of this discovery was to take the leap himself, or at least send something else through first. Minutes passed. The AI, no stranger to his impatience, complied. It processed his request with mechanical precision, locking in the coordinates of the anomaly. Elias had already rigged an experimental system, a quantum entanglement device that was meant to measure fluctuations in the fabric of space. He'd intended for it to be a controlled environment, a way to study these strange patterns without real risk. But as the machine powered up and the interface blinked green, Elias made an instinctual decision. This time, he wasn't going to wait for a theoretical model to form. He grabbed the small silver vial containing the lab's most daring subject, Archimedes, his lab mouse. The mouse was a creature of habit, always poking around in its cage and nibbling at scraps, yet Elias had a strange attachment to the little animal. He saw it as his first step into the unknown. "Go on, little guy," he murmured, placing the vial gently on the platform. Archimedes scurried out, oblivious to the gravity of the moment. The device hummed, and in the span of a heartbeat, the mouse was gone. Elias sat back, his eyes glued to the screen, watching the clock tick by. 3 minutes passed, then 5. The probe had returned after 8. He wasn't expecting the mouse to return so soon. But then it did. The system's alarms blared, and Elias scrambled to his feet as the tiny creature appeared again, right where it had been before. But something was different. It was subtle, a slight, almost imperceptible change in the mouse's behavior. It paused, sniffing the air, its eyes wide with a strange intelligence. Then Archimedes turned and stared directly at Elias, as though acknowledging him. "Impossible," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The mouse, calm as ever, returned to its cage. But Elias couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a coincidence. It had seen something, been to somewhere else, and brought something back with it. Elias made a decision. He had to know. He had to. Without another thought, he prepared for the next test, determined that he would be the one to follow where the mouse had gone. There was no going back now. The days following Archimedes' return were a blur. Elias barely slept, his mind consumed by what he had witnessed. The feeling that something had crossed over from another universe, something far beyond his understanding, gnawed at him. And, now with his next move in mind, he was more determined than ever to see it through, no matter the cost. But the world wasn't ready for what Elias had uncovered. He couldn't shake the nagging sense that someone, or something, had been keeping this secret from humanity. The more he sifted through the data, the more it became clear. Quantum travel, crossing dimensions, wasn't as new as he'd thought. Others had known, far longer than they had let on. Elias had been careful. He'd chosen to release only bits and pieces of his findings, enough to spark interest, but not enough to reveal everything. After all, once the scientific community got wind of his discoveries, there was no turning back. He needed to stay ahead, stay in control. But the leaks started anyway. One morning, the first emails came, cryptic, from anonymous sources with coordinates and coded messages. The subject lines read like an old conspiracy theory from a forgotten corner of the internet. "You're not the first," and "The truth is locked up." One email even attached a simple phrase: "They've been waiting." His heart raced as he clicked through the encrypted files. Images flashed on the screen, blurred photographs of ancient artifacts, hieroglyphs that resembled the stars, and old torn pages of a journal written in a language he couldn't decipher. They weren't from any known culture, not even from ancient Earth. The messages were always the same. Someone else had traveled across the multiverse before him. He had opened a door, but that door had been there for a long time. The implications were staggering. Someone or something had unlocked this technology centuries ago, and now Elias had just walked into the picture, clueless about how deep the deception went. He knew his next move wouldn't be simple. The people, or entities, that had hidden this secret wouldn't sit idly by while a lone human stumbled onto their treasure. Within hours, the Interstellar Science Coalition requested an emergency video conference. It was official. They wanted him to present his findings to the greater scientific community. At first, he had considered refusing, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized this was inevitable. They would find out sooner or later, and when they did, they would ask the questions that couldn't be avoided. Standing before the holographic table, Elias tried to steady his hands, though he couldn't suppress the tightness in his chest. Representatives from Earth's leading space agencies, as well as several alien dignitaries, were there, all watching him expectantly. Dr. Wren, one of them said, a familiar face from the coalition. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made Elias uneasy. What you've shown us so far is extraordinary, but there are things you haven't shared and we need to know. Why didn't you report this immediately? What's truly going on? Elias smiled, though it was a thin, tight-lipped grin. I've shared everything that matters. The room fell silent. He wasn't lying, not exactly, but he was holding back. You're hiding something. Another voice from the back of the room cut in sharply. We have intel that suggests you've discovered something far more dangerous than you're letting on. Elias leaned forward, locking eyes with the speaker. What you don't understand is that you've all known about this for decades. You just chose not to act. This technology isn't new. It's been buried, and now it's time for humanity to take the lead. A murmur spread across the room. His words hit harder than he'd intended. Elias didn't care. He had no time for diplomacy now. I'm not the only one who can access this, he continued. And when humanity realizes that, they'll never stop pushing forward. The truth will come out whether you're ready for it or not. And then, as if on cue, the screen blinked out, replaced by static. The meeting ended abruptly. Elias sat back, realizing that what had just happened was only the beginning. The coalition was scared, and they were hiding something. Whatever forces were at play, they were not going to let him or humanity control this new power for long. The events following the coalition's meeting were nothing short of chaotic. The scientific community was in uproar. On one hand, there were those who claimed Elias had cracked open the door to a new era. On the other hand, a growing faction argued that his discovery was a threat, a weapon too powerful for humanity to control. But for Elias, there was no turning back now. He had already seen what lay beyond the veil. He had to go further. The test with Archimedes had only scratched the surface, a brief glimpse into the unknown. But Elias had learned enough to know that what he had uncovered wasn't just another chapter in quantum physics. It was the very foundation of existence. A web of universes, tangled and intertwined, each one a reflection of the last, yet infinitely different. And somewhere, within that vast web was a connection, an answer, that could change everything. With that in mind, he decided it was time for the next test. Himself. The calculations were all there, the equipment in place, but the fear in his gut was undeniable. He could send objects through, analyze them, but what if he was wrong? What if his own body couldn't handle the strain of crossing the fold? For days, Elias worked without sleep. He enhanced the quantum entanglement device, recalibrating it to create a more stable bridge across dimensions. He connected his own neural interface to the machine, linking his mind directly to the data streams. He would be the test subject, he decided. A man should be the one to walk the path first, to break through the barriers that had held humanity captive for millennia, and then, on the seventh night, after confirming all the systems were primed and ready, Elias did what no one else dared. He stepped into the machine. A low hum filled the air as he activated the sequence. The world around him seemed to dissolve, folding inward like a page turning over. His senses were overloaded, his vision blurred, sounds warped, and the very fabric of time seemed to stretch, bend, and snap. Then, with a jolt, everything went still. Elias was no longer in his lab. He wasn't even in his own universe. The air was thick, heavy with an unnatural stillness. The sky was a deep violet, streaked with veins of silver light. Stars pulsed in patterns that made no sense, and the ground beneath him hummed with a low vibration. He stepped forward, his pulse racing, every instinct telling him to turn back, but curiosity pushed him onward. He took another step and then another. The longer he stayed, the more the world seemed to shift around him. The air itself felt alive, pressing against him, swirling like something just beyond his reach. Elias reached out, his fingers brushing the surface of a strange structure that rose from the ground, a tower made of shimmering, iridescent material, glowing softly under the strange stars. Suddenly the world rippled. The sky flickered like a broken television screen, and an image appeared before him. A message, etched in symbols he couldn't understand. His heart pounded as the message became clearer, the symbols shifting into something resembling a language. Human language. The message read, "You are not the first." The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. There was a vast history here, a civilization that had crossed the multiverse long before him. And now they were watching him, waiting. Before he could fully process the implications, a ripple of energy surged from the structure, and the ground trembled beneath his feet. Elias turned sharply, feeling the unmistakable pull of gravity, his gravity, drawing him back to the fold, to his own universe. The transition was jarring. A sudden snap, like being torn apart and then stitched back together, and Elias collapsed to the floor of his lab, gasping for air. For several long moments he lay there, struggling to catch his breath. His body felt alien, different. He was back, but not unchanged. The world outside the machine flickered briefly and then once again settled into its familiar form. But something had shifted. He had crossed the fold. And now, the knowledge he had found, the truth, was locked inside him. He could feel it, the weight of it pressing against his mind, a knowledge that could either save or destroy everything he had ever known. The universe had just become far more dangerous, and Elias knew, with a cold certainty, that the real battle was only beginning. Elias didn't know how long he'd been sitting there, the hum of his lab's equipment the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. His mind raced as the implications of his journey across the fold settled like a stone in his stomach. What he'd experienced was beyond comprehension, a world that shouldn't have existed, full of strange architecture and cryptic messages. And yet, it was real. He was certain of it. But as much as the truth of his discovery excited him, it also terrified him. The knowledge that he wasn't the first to walk through these dimensional corridors weighed heavily on him. He had uncovered a hidden history of cross-dimensional travel, a history that someone, or something, wanted to keep buried. And the message, "You are not the first," had been a warning. Elias had stumbled into something far larger than he had ever imagined. His thoughts were interrupted by the sharp chime of his console. The AI, which had been quiet for far too long, came to life with an urgency that made Elias stiffen. "Dr. Wren, there is a priority message coming through. It's from the Coalition." Elias felt a knot form in his chest. He knew this was coming. The message, the confrontation. The Coalition had been watching him, monitoring his every move. They had seen his reports, the partial data he had leaked, and now they wanted answers. "Put it through," he said, his voice tight. The screen flickered, and a holographic representation of Counselor Leora Thorne, a senior official from the Interstellar Science Coalition, materialized before him. Her expression was stern, her eyes narrowed in a way that made it clear she wasn't here for pleasantries. "Dr. Wren," she said, her voice cold, "you've kept us in the dark for long enough. The entire galaxy is on edge after your recent discoveries. We need to know what you've uncovered, and we need to know now." Elias leaned forward, trying to steady his breath. "I've uncovered something that no one was supposed to know. And now, it's out. The truth about cross-dimensional travel, about the multiverse, it's real. The systems you've been monitoring, the anomalies you've been so careful to hide from public view, they were never accidents, they were intentional. And it's time we stopped pretending otherwise." Leora's face darkened. "You've gone too far, Wren. The truth is dangerous. The galaxy isn't ready for this kind of power. You're stirring up something that no one can control. Elias shook his head, his frustration rising. You've already known. You and the others, this isn't new. You've kept this from the public for decades. I was just the one who finally opened the door. Leora's eyes flickered to something off-screen, and Elias sensed a shift in the room. Something was wrong. He had no proof, but he could feel it. There was more going on here than anyone was letting on. You don't understand, Elias, Leora said, her voice suddenly quieter, more dangerous. You've unleashed something that we can't put back in the bottle. The multiverse isn't just a scientific curiosity. It's a resource, a weapon, and the wrong hands getting hold of it could mean the end of everything. Before Elias could respond, the screen flickered again and a burst of static filled the room. The signal abruptly cut off, leaving him staring at the blank screen in confusion. The momentary silence was broken by another chime. This time, it wasn't from the Coalition. It was a system alert. Something was wrong. Very wrong. His eyes darted to the readouts. The data streams, the anomalies, they were all fluctuating wildly. Something had triggered an event. His lab sensors began picking up strange readings, and Elias felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. His research, his tests, everything was being tracked. But it wasn't just the Coalition that had been watching him. He glanced toward the window, his pulse quickening as a dark shape moved against the stars outside. The Valithi, the alien species he'd known as Earth's allies, were positioning their ships just beyond the reach of the orbiting moon. Their sensors, like the Coalition's, were sophisticated enough to detect the same quantum fluctuations he had been experimenting with, and their intentions, far less friendly. The realization hit him like a hammer. The galaxy's most powerful factions had already marked him, had already begun their moves to either control or eliminate him. Elias had thought he could control this discovery, but the game had changed. Now, it was clear. He wasn't just up against the established powers of Earth. He was up against the entire galaxy, and they were coming for him. Elias didn't have time to think. The warning bells blared through his lab, urging him into action. The Valithi ships, sleek, dark vessels that defied the laws of physics, were moving into position, their presence a silent threat against the fragile quiet of Europa's orbit. The AI, still monitoring his system, issued a calm but urgent alert. Dr. Wren, the Valithi fleet has initiated a containment perimeter. They are aware of the anomalies and have locked onto your location. Containment. The word sent a chill down Elias's spine. The Valithi weren't just interested in studying his discoveries. They wanted to control them, and if they had already tracked him, it meant they knew he had crossed into the fold, into the unknown. But that wasn't the worst part. Elias had suspected that the Coalition's sudden, cold response to his findings wasn't entirely about his safety. He had seen the veiled threats in Leora's voice. This wasn't just a matter of power. There was something more at play, something they were hiding. And it was clear now. The Coalition and the Valithi were more intertwined than he had ever imagined. AI, initiate full encryption and create a firewall around my systems, Elias ordered, his voice sharper than he intended. Understood, the AI responded, its voice oddly calm in the face of rising tension. Warning, the Valithi have advanced countermeasures. The firewall may not hold long. Elias cursed under his breath. He knew the Valithi well. He'd spent years collaborating with their scientists. But their methods, their culture, they were not transparent. They didn't play by the same rules. Elias wasn't just a scientist to them. He was a potential tool, something to be weaponized or erased. Grabbing his emergency pack, he keyed in a series of commands to the transport shuttle parked outside. His heart raced as he began making his way to the landing bay. The shuttle was his only chance to escape the Valithi's grip. Once they had control of the facility, he wouldn't have the time or resources to fight back. As he approached the bay, he heard a soft thud behind him. He spun around, pulse hammering in his chest. The shadow of a figure materialized in the doorway. A human silhouette, tall, almost elegant in its poise. Dr. Wren, a voice said. It was Leora. We need to talk. Elias's instincts flared. He hadn't expected the coalition to send anyone to speak directly with him, but here she was, as calm and poised as ever, standing in the dim light of the lab, the last person he wanted to see now. "You're too late," Elias snapped. "The Valithi are already here. This is bigger than you or your coalition, Leora. I know you've been hiding something. I know you've been involved with them longer than you've let on." Leora didn't flinch. She stepped into the room with quiet authority, her expression unreadable. "I'm not here to argue with you, Elias. The Valithi aren't the real threat." She took a deep breath. "It's the others, the real watchers, the ones who don't want humanity to have the knowledge you've uncovered." Elias froze. The room felt colder, the weight of her words sinking in. He had suspected the Valithi were just the tip of the iceberg, but to hear Leora confirm it shook him to his core. "Who are they?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "They're the ones who have been monitoring this for centuries, Elias. They're not from our universe. They've been watching us for a long time, and they've been ensuring that humanity never steps beyond the boundaries of the fold. They call themselves the Aramath, and if you continue, they will come for you." Elias shook his head in disbelief. "Aramath? What kind of name is that? Who? Not who. What?" Leora interjected sharply. "They're ancient, older than any of the species we know. They've traveled across universes and observed countless civilizations rise and fall, and now they've turned their focus to us. They don't want us to have this power, and they'll stop at nothing to ensure we never do." Elias stepped back, the enormity of her words weighing heavily on him. "Then why are you here? Why didn't you warn me sooner?" Leora's eyes softened, just for a moment. "Because there's no escaping it now. You've already opened the door. The Aramath will come, and the only way to survive is to fight back." Elias felt the full weight of the situation crashing down on him. There was no turning back. The discovery, the knowledge, it was no longer just about science. It was a battle for humanity's future. "You think we can win this?" Elias asked. Leora met his gaze. "I think we don't have a choice." Elias stood still, processing Leora's words as the room around him seemed to close in. The air felt thick with the weight of what she had just revealed. The Aramath, a force older than any known civilization, watching from beyond the boundaries of the multiverse. The realization that such an entity had been quietly observing humanity, waiting for them to stumble upon the knowledge Elias had uncovered, was almost too much to bear. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncertain. The distant hum of the lab system seemed distant, irrelevant. Elias wasn't sure what he had expected, but this wasn't it. In his wildest theories, he had imagined discovering the hidden history of interdimensional travel, but he hadn't prepared for the truth, that his actions had attracted the attention of something far beyond the Coalition, the Valithi, or any power humanity had ever faced. "So what now?" Elias asked, his voice rough, trying to steady himself. "How do we fight them? What's the plan?" Leora's expression remained resolute, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Fear, perhaps. Uncertainty. She didn't have the answers either. Not fully. No one did. The Aramath were not a known quantity, not something that could be studied or understood. All they knew was that the Aramath had existed longer than any known species, pulling the strings of countless civilizations from the shadows, manipulating events, ensuring that no one species ever grew too powerful. "You don't fight them, head on," Leora replied, stepping closer. "You can't. They're not bound by the same laws we are. The way they manipulate the multiverse, it's something beyond our comprehension, but they are vulnerable in ways we can exploit." Elias frowned. "Vulnerable? How?" "They sound like they've seen it all." Leora hesitated for a moment. "They're obsessed with control. The reason they've stayed hidden for so long is because they've kept a tight grip on the flow of knowledge across dimensions. They allow some species to discover certain things, to push the boundaries of their understanding, but only so far. The moment a species begins to push beyond that threshold, they intervene. They don't want any one civilization to be able to break free from their grasp. But they fear something, Elias. What? The unpredictability of it all, she said, her voice low. The Aramath are ancient, yes, but they are rigid. They've seen countless civilizations rise and fall, and they've adapted. But they don't know how to handle chaos, how to handle us. Elias felt a flicker of hope stir inside him. You're saying we have a chance? That we can beat them? Leora's gaze sharpened. Yes, but it won't be easy. To stand a chance, we need to tap into something they don't understand. A force they've never encountered, human will. We're unpredictable. We don't play by the rules, and that's why they fear us. But we need to go further. Much further than you've gone so far. We need to find the heart of the multiverse itself. Elias's mind reeled as she spoke. The heart of the multiverse. What did that even mean? He'd barely begun to scratch the surface of dimensional travel, and now Leora was talking about taking it even further. How do we even begin? He asked, his voice tinged with doubt. Leora didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped aside and waved a hand toward a console. The screen lit up, revealing a series of maps, coordinates, and symbols he didn't recognize. This, she said, her voice quiet but resolute, is where we begin. The Aramath have been keeping something hidden, something tied directly to the heart of the multiverse. They've locked it away in a place that even their most advanced technology can't reach. But I believe you can. Elias leaned in, studying the data, his mind racing. The symbols, the coordinates. They were unlike anything he'd seen. This was the key, the real key, to unlocking the full potential of his discovery. This location, he said, tapping a series of coordinates. It's in the fold, isn't it? Leora nodded. Yes. And the Aramath have been guarding it for millennia. If we can reach it, we may be able to find the power to finally break their control. Elias glanced back at her. And how do we even survive getting there? Leora's eyes narrowed. That's why you're not alone in this, Elias. I've contacted some allies, people who have been dealing with the Aramath in their own way. They've been waiting for someone like you. Someone who can bridge the gaps, see the patterns the Aramath can't predict. Elias felt the weight of it all settle on his shoulders. He wasn't just fighting for his own life anymore. He was fighting for the future of humanity, and maybe, just maybe, for the future of the multiverse itself. The road ahead was unclear, fraught with danger and uncertainty. But one thing was certain, the Aramath were not going to let him, or anyone, unveil the secrets they had hidden for so long, and Elias had no choice but to press forward, no matter the cost. The shuttle hummed beneath Elias's feet, a steady pulse that echoed through the small cabin. Outside the viewport, the stars shimmered, a distant sea of cold, indifferent light. Leora sat across from him, her expression unreadable, but Elias could sense the weight of her thoughts. The journey they were embarking on was nothing short of madness. No one had ever dared venture so deep into the fold, into the heart of the multiverse. And now, they were not just going there. They were going to face the Aramath itself. Elias leaned back, his mind racing. They had prepared for this moment as best they could. The coordinates Leora had given him led to a place so far beyond conventional understanding that it felt like a dream. A place where even the most advanced science couldn't guarantee survival. Yet something inside Elias told him this was where it all had to lead. The heart of the multiverse, a center where the Aramath had hidden the true power of dimensional travel, held the answers. Answers that could save or destroy everything. Are we really ready for this? Elias asked, his voice breaking the silence. Leora met his gaze, her eyes steady. No one is ever ready for something like this. But we've already made the choice. There's no turning back now. Elias nodded, swallowing his doubts. They had no other options. The Valithi were closing in, the coalition was divided, and the Aramath were watching, waiting for them to make a mistake. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just about survival. It was about something deeper, something buried within humanity itself. The Aramath had kept the secrets of the multiverse hidden for millennia, but Elias believed there was something they couldn't foresee, the unpredictability of humanity's will. As the shuttle accelerated, the fold began to distort before them, the space around them rippling like a piece of fabric being stretched too far. The sheer force of the multiverse's unknown dimensions began to tug at the edges of reality, and Elias felt his heart rate spike. The very air seemed to shift, to bend. He had crossed this boundary once before, but that had been a brief encounter, a testing ground. Now they were going deeper than anyone ever had. Leora activated the ship's navigation systems, recalibrating the ship's quantum engines. We'll need to use the energy from the fold itself to fuel our entry. It's the only way to breach the final layer, she explained. Elias barely had time to react before the shuttle lurched, the fabric of space folding inward around them. He gasped, the sensation of weightlessness making his stomach flip. The stars, outside, twisted and swirled, becoming a vortex of brilliant light and dark shadows. The walls of the shuttle began to shimmer, their integrity seemingly threatened by the unstable energy around them. "We're crossing into uncharted space," Leora said, her voice calm, but filled with an underlying tension. "Prepare yourself." Elias gripped the edge of his seat as the shuttle plunged deeper, the distortions becoming more pronounced. The stars outside flickered, shifting like ghosts between realities, each one a possible universe, a possibility lost to time and space. He could feel it then, the pull of the fold, the hum of something ancient and powerful beckoning them forward. Then, as quickly as it had started, everything stopped. The shuttle jolted to a halt, its systems blinking erratically as the navigation console flared with red alerts. "Leora," Elias said, his voice strained. "What just happened? Where are we?" Leora's face was pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. This isn't the place we were supposed to arrive at." Elias's breath caught in his chest. The fabric of reality around them was thinner than he had imagined, less stable. They hadn't just arrived at the heart of the multiverse. They had arrived somewhere else entirely. The view outside the shuttle's window had shifted. The swirling galaxies, the endless folds of space, everything was gone. Instead, there was a vast expanse of blackness, broken only by a distant glowing structure, an immense fortress of energy and light that seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions. The shape was not something made by any species. It was alive. "Leora," Elias whispered, his voice a mix of awe and terror. "What is that?" Leora leaned forward, staring out the window, her eyes filled with a deep understanding, one that only moments ago had seemed impossible. "The Aramath," she said, her voice trembling. "That's their home, the center of everything, the source of their power, and we've just crossed into their domain." For the first time in his life, Elias felt completely and utterly powerless. The very fabric of reality seemed to stretch and twist around him, and he had no idea what would happen next. But there was no going back now. The heart of the multiverse was within their grasp, and so, too, were the Aramath. Now it was time to face the Watchers.